Last time we ended on the note that inner renunciation of desire leads to equality, accomplishes surrender, delivers from the ego, and brings oneness. Oneness in dynamic force, not merely in static peace. It is one thing to feel oneness with God and with God in the world. When you are in a poise of indrawn, silent, immobile peace. It is another thing to have that feeling and sense of oneness in dynamic force, even when you act, even when you function in the world, to have that vibrancy of oneness, that you are acting in God and for God, in God in all. That is oneness in dynamic force. Dynamic activity based on a still passivity. In other words, the largest possible action based upon immobile calm. Both are necessary. The one does not exclude the other. Our way is one of inclusion, not of exclusion. Man has arrived at a state of consciousness when he must learn to pick up the various threads and weave them into one becoming. To live in division is to be enslaved to nature. Why we should strive for oneness? Because oneness is our natural state. Division is a fall from that innate state. And as long as we live in division, feeling separate from others, from our own source, we live enslaved in nature, enslaved to nature. To live in equality and oneness of self is to rise above nature. Kindly note that this oneness is in the self. The self-consciousness, there is oneness. But in nature, in practice, we have to take into account the fact of the many. That is why you cannot have true oneness unless you realize the truth of your own self. Self-realization is indispensable, not for sake of escape, to work out my personal salvation, but in order that I realize my unity, solidarity with the rest of creation, and develop my individual consciousness into a universal a cosmic consciousness. As long as we are slaves of nature, whatever free will we talk is only an illusion, because man is driven by nature, whether he is conscious of it or not. And nature drives through the workings of three modes. Nature has three modes. There is the mode of obscurity and inertia, what is called tamas. The qualitative mode of obscurity, laziness, inertia is the lowest mode of nature in movement. Nature consists of three modes. The qualitative mode of obscurity and inertia, which always arrests motion, which always retards development, sleep, swoon, inability to move or unwillingness to move under whatever plea. That shows that the mode of tamas, inertia, is preponderant. The second mode, rajas, is the qualitative mode of action and passion. It is this rajas that whips us into activity. It may use any springs, motives, desire, aggrandizement of ego, fulfillment of wishes, whatever it is. It is this mode of nature, of action and passion. It is a way of nature to awake creatures from their initial sleep and inertia by introducing passion, intensity, action. And once this mode becomes too preponderant, it has the third and still higher mode, the qualitative mode of light and harmony. It is called sattva. Sattva is that mode or guna which harmonizes, introduces a balance and sheds some light, serenity. All human activity normally is a result of the interaction of these three modes. At certain stages, one mode may have the upper hand. At other stages, another mode may have the upper hand. A wise man uses one mode, say, of rajas, activity, passion, to correct the imbalance created by a preponderant mode of inertia. And when activity becomes too much, when man loses himself into passionate movements, his mind brings a certain balance, holds the reins, and induces an order, a harmony. Now this is how nature works. When these three modes are at work, activity goes on. By processes of yoga, or mental will, when you can silence all the three modes, they fall into a certain equilibrium and everything comes to a standstill. Till then, nature drives the individual as if he is sitting on her wheels. And when we think it is our choice, it is only an illusion of free will. The choice is impelled by the operation of one of these three modes of nature. This nature, however, is mechanical only in its appearance. Within nature, there is a presence, there is a divine witness. It is for the pleasure, the joy of that indwelling person that nature is at play. It is possible for man to acquire control over nature first by detachment, withdrawal. Normally a man is completely lost, involved in the movements of nature. By steps of detachment, self-observation, he learns to stay aloof in certain bodies. But that is not the end. Many traditions stop there. They say you withdraw, you be a witness, you get liberated from nature. But that way you stop only halfway. Once you are detached, able to separate yourself from nature, the next step that you are intended to take is to rise above nature. You become the master of that nature, lord of nature. In other words, you identify yourself with that master consciousness, the divine consciousness, which sits over nature, individual or universal, as its Lord, master. This mastery over nature, not escape from nature, is the goal that the divine Creator has set for man. For what is nature? Nature, certain philosophies tell us, is something opposite of God. They make an unbridgeable gulf between the soul and the nature, between God and nature. But that is only an appearance. As long as nature functions in the belt of ignorance, it looks different, it looks inferior, it looks foreign to the spirit, to God, to the soul. But once you arrive at a level where nature functions consciously, nature above the belt of ignorance, in the zone of knowledge, as nature gets illumined, the consciousness gets more and more self-aware. Nature reveals herself to be only a power of God. Nature is not an antithesis. Nature is not an opponent of God, of the Spirit, but only a power of God. And the texts say The sages, in their concentration, beheld this power of God lost in the modes of its own workings. We do not see real nature because we are bewildered by so many movements, our own ways of action. But the seer with an illumined sight, he sees, he beholds behind the surface. In Indian philosophy, nature in ignorance is called Prakriti. The soul, God, is called the Purusha, the person, and nature is called Prakriti, executive force. Prakriti means executive force. But when it is illumined, it is a self-aware power, puissance, Shakti of God the Lord. And this power is the divine reality itself in its rawest form. The divine being is multiple. His knowledge, first being, existent, full of knowledge. You can realize him as knowledge. You can realize him as sheer consciousness, awareness. You can also realize as power. And that power is himself as power. It is not something different. It is like fire and heat, the sun and the light. So power is instinct with the being of God. It is left to each individual whether he will identify himself with nature in ignorance and remain a slave of nature, or he will take steps to increase his quantum of awareness, consciousness, and rise to the heights and elevate the workings of nature to the heights of knowledge, to the heights of being. It is in each person's hands. And intensive discipline, culturing of consciousness, which is another term for yoga, for spiritual discipline, is precisely intended to rise above this zone of ignorance of nature. In a normal man, all these modes of nature are intermixed. You cannot say that it is only one mode that is operating. And they result in the limitation of consciousness to the ego. An average man's life is organized around this ego. And to that extent, his consciousness also is limited by the state and the stage of the ego. That leads to certain inequality of mind and heart. What flatters the ego, what appeals to the interests of ego, there we put a stress and we like it. What doesn't appeal? What questions the ego? Strikes as something unpleasant, and we try to avoid it. Irrespective of the intrinsic positions, intrinsic merits of a thing, we decide whether a thing is good or bad from the point of view of its appeal or otherwise to the ego. That is where inequality comes in, both of mind and of heart. And to have this equal-mindedness, equality of response, feel equality whatever things you come into contact with, the only key is to perceive oneness with the one supreme source of all, and with all existences. Our ideal is thus to live in God and not in ego. Ego limits us, soils the purity of the soul. There is an interesting passage about the ego, how insignificant architects of low-built lives with the ego's factories and marts surround the beautiful temple of the soul. The soul has a temple, but it is surrounded by the factories and the marts of the plebeian ego. And the ego is always helped, supported by falsehood, describing a world where lies the origins of all wrong movements, perversions that take place on earth, a world of life force. There is a passage. The ego was lord upon his peacock seat, and falsehood sat by him, his mate and queen. The world turned to them as heaven to truth and God. So with this king of ego and queen of falsehood, the world turning to them as its sovereigns. No wonder man lives tied to limitation and falsehood. We have to shift our allegiance, our center of gravity, from the ego to God. Next is to be perfectly equal in all happenings and to all beings. And this is possible only when we learn to see and feel all as one with ourselves and with God. Only when we really perceive that all are one with me and with God, there is a beginning of equality. Also, to feel all, not as myself, but in myself. The consciousness, the being must be so enlarged that it must contain the whole universe in its sweep. To feel all in oneself and in God. And third, to feel God in all and oneself in all. These are three distinct realizations which are necessary. One is to feel others as myself. The second is to feel all in myself. And third, much more difficult, is to see myself in all. Only when these three terms are fulfilled, that there can be perfect equality and peace. It is not enough to live in God, necessary, but it is only the first step. To live in God consciousness is followed by to act in God and not in ego. You have to function. You have to act and react in that consciousness of the presence of God in yourself and in the world. And a worker, each man has work to do, things to fulfill. He has to choose action, not with reference to personal preferences, but according to the living highest truth in us. When we refer to the guiding idea as to what is the action I have to do, that choice, indicated choice, may not be very palatable to the ego. But a seeker shall not exercise his choice, which is ultimately the choice of the ego and nature, in choosing his work. He has to refer to his highest self. And next, not to act by our separate will, but to allow action to happen according to the divine will. This is the meaning of surrender. Not to function according to my petty will, but to tune my will with the higher will, and let that will find in me an unresisting, unquestioning instrument. Only so can I be exalted into identity with the divine power, with the divine consciousness. I must try by stages to subordinate my will to the higher will. Next, to identify my will with the higher will. Third, to instrumentalize my will of the higher will of God. And by that identity, one rises into union with the divine. And that is, the key is surrender. Surrender, as I said, is a living attitude, a repeated orientation of mind, life and body, so as to be moved only by that, not by my needs. And here are a few passages which will give an idea of what surrender means in the spiritual context. I have given my mind to be dug, thy channel mind. I have offered up my will to thy will. Let nothing of myself be left behind in our union, mystic and unutterable. And then he says another, keep only my soul, doesn't want to keep anything else. Keep only my soul to adore eternally and meet thee in each form and soul of thee. Confident of his grace, expect his will. Let him lead, though hidden be the bourne. See him in all that happens, that fulfill for which thou wert born. Next, a deep surrender is their source of might. They are mighty because they have surrendered to God. Deep within, they are linked to a higher power than their own limited, exiguous, personal power. Somewhere it was said that worship lifts the bowed strength of man to the heights of God. Or any technique, any means is to be utilized to work this surrender. And this working out of the decision to surrender, moment to moment, is what is called consecration. Consecration, according to the word meaning, is to consecrate, to make sacred, to make acceptable to God. And that you do by surrendering, offering it to God. And this you do minute by minute. Not just a pious hope expressed during prayer time in the morning, but all the while, all the 24 hours, there should be an attitude which will always influence you in offering and surrendering to God. After a while, one doesn't need to consciously do it. It becomes a habit. And by practice, one does it spontaneously, without having to exercise a will. And what are the practical steps of this self-discipline? Elimination of egoistic activity and its foundation in egoistic consciousness. Egoistic activity is based upon egoistic consciousness. And this consciousness of ego, the heart of the ego, is the claim to be separate from others. I am different and the others are different. My interests always must have precedence. They should feed upon the interests of others. So this original sense of separativity is the seed of ego. And separate development, a spiritual seeker turns to reverse this trend, break down the walls of separativity that erected by the ego, and flow out in unity, union with the world and the source of the world. For this, we have to cut the knot of ego and desire in action. There can be desire without expressing itself always in action. But it is the leading motive. Desire and ego are the two accomplices which keep us always in imprisonment to nature. And they tie up our whole being into a series of knots, psychological knots, subtle knots. And the scripture says, one has to take out the soul extremely patiently, as you take out a blade of rice from the external cover. And it is only when these knots are loosened, untied, that the liberation can come. Otherwise, the classic imagery is man is tied to a post with 3 tight knots. It is described that man is a victim of sacrifice. There is a continuous sacrifice going on, and the human soul is tied to that post with 3 knots. The God of vastness is prayed to untie those knots. The name of that person, man, who is tied, means the head of bliss. Inside there is bliss. But he lives on the surface, so he can't enjoy that bliss. He is tied in 3 places. Where? 3 means in the mind, in the heart emotions, and in the physical. In all these 3 levels, man is tied to nature. Nature is the post. And one has to untie oneself. Summon the aid of the gods if one can't do it oneself. And thus get free. Desire has its home in emotion. We speak of ego and desire. But we must note that the location of ego and the location of desire, they are different. Because desire has its home in emotion, sensations, and instincts. They may have their effect on the mind, but primarily desire proceeds from here, the abdomen. When something comes to give you what you desire, there is a thrill here. When something is likely to obstruct, there is fear, and the fear is here in the abdomen. That is where the Tantra Shastra says they are the centers of desire, of ambition, of passions, and petty satisfactions. It is the center of the nervous disturbances are here. And the nerves are highly at the mercy of this desire movement. So as I was saying, desire has its home in emotion, sensation, and instinct. But the ego sense is rooted in the mind. In an animal, the mind has not developed. So it is not bothered about the ego. Once it satisfies its creature comforts, it doesn't matter. But man, a mind has come. A limited mind, an inchoate mind, which twists things. And that is where the ego sense is rooted in the mind and the will in the mind. All thoughts all willings proceed on the wings of this egoism. And this ego also has its repercussions on the emotional being, the desire being, but its home is there in the mind. Desire hankers after the fruit of works. It wants, when it does work, when I do work, I want some reward. That reward may be external, may be internal. It may be a satisfaction of doing a thing well. It may be a kind of appreciation that I look for from others. It may give me a certain satisfaction that I have done this work in affirmation of the ideal that I hold. In all ways, there is always a hankering to the fruit of works. When it is an external fruit, like earning money, getting fame and name, dominating over others, establishing a kingdom of thoughts, kingdom of passions, kingdom of wealth, winning victories, all these are external rewards. But whether the rewards are external or the rewards are internal, it is desire that hankers after the fruit. That is why in spiritual life it is enjoined upon you that you shall not desire for the fruit of works. You can work and you have to work, but work as a duty, work as a sacrifice, offering to God in man, but don't bother about the fruit of works. Whatever fruit is given to you, you accept. By doing so, there is a certain mitigation of the crudities of ego. As the practice perfects itself, there is an absolute elimination of ego. And the true test whether I have the right attitude, whether I have removed the ego factor from my life, from my work situation, is equality of mind and heart to all results. There should be a perfect equality and composure, whether it is in a worldly sense successful or failure. There is a sense in which what is called a success in the world, success of the external man, can be a failure of the soul. The soul always wants to progress, and by succeeding in the world, achieving one's desires, man is apt to be self-content. And self-complacent. He doesn't make an effort to move further, to improve himself further. He has succeeded. That is in that sense that my teacher once said that successes are greater tests than failures in spiritual life. It is easy enough to remember God, seek for the help of God, correct oneself, improve oneself. When one fails, when one succeeds, one is filled with a sense of one's own importance, one's own perfection. One doesn't see the need of correcting things. So, a spiritual seeker looks upon success and failure in a different eye. And whatever comes, he has a certain equality of mind and heart. But this equality again, there are many simulacrums, semblances of equality. For instance, there is that feeling of disappointed resignation. One would like to believe it is equality. It is not. It is a result of a defeat. And you have a sense of resignation. But the resignation does not come out of love or waiting upon the will of God, but frustration, defeat, disappointment. Also, a certain pride. That too is egoistic pride. I don't care whether it is success or failure. Or it can be of certain indifference. Whatever happens. That is not the true equality. The true equality is something different. It proceeds from within. Even there are certain steps. One begins with an equality of the stoic. There is a certain stoic attitude of bearing, enduring whatever results come, without reacting. Or a devout resignation to the will of God out of devotion. Not because I have failed, but because I love God. I am devoted to God. And I accept His will under whatever circumstances. These are not equality, but steps towards equality. What is equal is, one must have a wide, equal oneness of the spirit. Without these external stimulations. And there are stages by which we arrive at this equality of the soul. We begin by bearing the shocks with the central part of our being, always silent, always untouched. You bear, not with resignation, but the silent soul poise, and then extend this calm of the soul to the instruments of the mind, the emotions and the life impulsions and the physicality. First have a calm, imperturbable calm at the level of the soul, and then reach it by education, by pressure to the external instrumental personality. And in this process, we can draw help from stoicism or a calm philosophy or religious exaltation. All these, in themselves they are not equality, but they can help man to arrive at a certain equality of the spirit. And a fulfilled equality is that there is a continuous joy, a flow of joy which is not affected whether one fails or one succeeds in a worldly sense. The joy of the soul, the joy of God within, flows uninterrupted. It is concerned with the experience, not what the experience means qualitatively in terms of success or failure. To do, to work, to perform is the reward in itself. The energies are poured in a certain direction. They bring back certain results which the soul assimilates. What we register what we feel as pain, as suffering on our surface is not registered as pain and suffering in the deeper level where there is the soul. The soul draws delight from an experience which may strike us as painful. That experience is felt as painful because of our limitation of the receiving consciousness. Once that limitation is removed, the experience is received in its right value. But the soul always receives things in its own way. And so, when you speak of a good man suffering, it is only a part of it. Suffering is and can be a deliberate choice of the soul inside to progress more quickly. It is like doing exercises, physical culture exercises. A man who wants to build muscles quickly, he will exercise the hard way, not the simpler and the easy way. So a soul which is growing, which is impatient, wants to reach its parent divine, it chooses those experiences which build its spiritual muscles. And the experience is always the harder. There is a passage in one of the Upanishads which says that in this world there is the good and there is the pleasant. And we have seen that what is pleasant is rarely what is good, and what is good is rarely pleasant. But the wise man, he chooses what is good, Shreyas and not Preyas. This philosophy, this perception, the relative value of our reactions has to be kept in mind. If you ask a child, a small boy or a girl, to do all these exercises and acrobatics, that child will shrink because it means a certain difficulty, inconvenience, strain. But an adult will do those exercises joyfully. He will suffer the pain with a certain satisfaction. They say you must exercise till it pains, till it hurts. You have to stretch till it hurts. So the soul, in a hurry to arrive at its destination, chooses an experience that the outer little ignorant personality finds very painful. As I said that day, pain is the hammer of gods to break a dead resistance in mortal's heart. But for pain, nobody would advance, nobody would bother to find out why things are like this. It is only when there is pain that I find out what has gone wrong and correct myself. And in that process I progress. Pain is the signature of ignorance. As long as there is ignorance, there has to be pain. Wherever there is pain, you can take it that there is ignorance. The suffering party is not conscious, doesn't live in knowledge of his unity with God. At a higher level, there is no suffering, there is no pain. At a deeper level, there is no pain, there is no suffering. And even if there is, body feels it as pain, the consciousness doesn't suffer. I am always fond of relating an incident that happened, took place in the life of a modern self-realized saint called Ramana Maharshi in India, South India, passed away in 1950. During his last years, he had a kind of tumor in the arm. And he did not want it to be interfered with. He said, let the thing take its course. But the disciples, they never allow the teacher to function in freedom. Their very love, their very devotion become fetters to the teacher. So they insisted and they brought surgeons who said it has to be operated. Now these saints, they always will tell you once what is to be done. But if you repeat twice, thrice, your own will, they just let your will prevail. They withdraw their own will. And the doctors wanted to operate. He said, yes, you can operate. They wanted to give him that injection, anesthesia. He refused. A saint who has realized certain heights of consciousness, he will not allow anything to be done which will lower that consciousness, which will stupefy that consciousness. So he said no. So he just held his hand. And the surgeons operated, 2 or 3 surgeons operated. Afterwards, one foolish devotee, he was intrigued, perhaps these wise people, well-realized people don't have pain. That's why he can bear it. So he went and asked him, was there no pain? He said, pain there was, but no suffering. Just think of it. Many of you may have heard of a Marine from the American forces. He was seriously ill and he was hospitalized. As he was recovering, the doctor talked to him slowly and at a personal level and told him, look here, young man, now you are getting cured and you will be discharged soon. But you have to stop smoking. Then he gave a doubtful, all right. And then he said, you have to stop alcoholic beverages. That also the Marines followed. And then he said, and you have to give up company of women. Then that man shot up and he said, then why do I live for? Now similar question arises. If you don't have personal choice of work, if you have to give up desire for action, fruit of action, then how do you act? For every action there has to be a motive. And the normal motive is ego and desire. If both of these are eliminated, how does one feel impelled to work, to act? This question doesn't arise when one is serious about one's quest for God. Because one learns to do everything in God world and God possessed consciousness. To think of fruits of work, to think what advantages this work will have for me. looks so irrelevant, childish, that nobody thinks on those lines. Everything that comes, the incentive is to utilize every work, every action as an occasion to offer something of oneself to the divine, to pour one's energies to the divine. So every opportunity for work is welcomed as an occasion to grow into divine consciousness, to express something of that higher consciousness already imbibed. And one learns to work as sacrifice to the divine. I once again draw attention to the fact that the word sacrifice in English has a certain connotation of unwillingness or pain, some denial. But the movement of giving to the divine is one of joyous self-giving. There is no regret. There is no self-denial. At any rate, there is no feeling of self-denial. One does it with joy, with abandon, with spontaneity. And one uses work, uses activity to dig the principle of surrender of all being to God. The only motive of a spiritual seeker is God love and God service. Service of God and love for God, wherever He is. That is a much more intenser motive than any motive at the desire level or ego level can ever be. And the culmination is when one consciously feels the will of the eternal driving one. When that supreme will drives us, one doesn't care to see whether that action conforms to the standards set up by the society, whether it is consistent with what the scriptures say. But one just acts as one possessed. Only it is here one is possessed by a divine afflatus, divine consciousness. Many who have broken the old bonds and opened the passage to newer realms of consciousness have thus acted on a divine drive, divine impetus, and they have identified themselves completely with the divine will. Work is action. Work is to be welcomed, not shunned as distracted, but welcomed for two reasons. One, as a means for the expression and working out of self-surrender, self-giving to God, elimination, drying up and elimination of the roots of ego and desire. It is a field, work is a field for preparing ourselves for an entire union with the divine. Even after union is achieved, the liberation is effected, work becomes a means for reaching that consciousness, reaching the blessings of God to the world at large. So there is always a qualitative improvement in work as one progresses in the inner life. Each gain that is made is communicated in the outer activity. One can examine oneself, particularly in the field of human relations, how one behaves, whether if my colleague does not agree with me in the work, does not conform to what I expected to do, what is my reaction? One of resentment, one of anger, one of fault finding, or one of understanding, one of yielding, one of hoping to convince him later, but in love. A growing motivation of love is a feature of working for the divine. Nothing is ever considered on a personal level. The question of status, the question of authority doesn't arise at all. Because one lives in a consciousness that is one. Each one does his part, plays his role. There is no, in the divine perspective, there is no high and low. Maybe a person with greater capacities may have a certain kind of work which we normally consider to be important. And another person may be fitted for some other type of work. So this qualitative difference of the different types of work does not mean any change or variation in the value of the work. From a divine point of view, my teacher used to say, scrubbing a floor, keeping the utensils in a kitchen clean is as important as the work of a surgeon in his surgery or of an artist in his studio. It depends upon with what spirit you pour your energies, what spirit of perfection governs your exertion and your attitude, whether it is God-oriented or it is self-oriented. That decides the value of the work. So, modern psychologists have much to learn in this spiritual approach to action. In all religions, most traditions of spiritual concerns, actions are looked upon as means of knowledge, as things which lose their significance and relevance as one advances in knowledge, develops in consciousness. It is an error. Actions, on the other hand, receive a greater value. Work becomes a more important factor in one's life as one develops in consciousness. Because most of the ills of the world are because action, activity, they are done from a lower level of consciousness, mixed motive, egoistic level. The more the people come into being, who will work, who will act from a position of enlightenment with a different approach, the world will be a better place to live in. And that is where spirituality of the day, modern spirituality, stresses upon the pragmatic approach of the spirit. Your teaching or my teaching, whatever it is, it has value for man insofar as it is capable of improving the tone of life, improving the human situations in the world. And that is the touchstone on which we measure the soundness of a system, as also the truth of our own progress. So there you are, we conclude, we seek and strive for equality of mind and heart, based upon renunciation of the desire for fruit, and action done as a self-offering to the divine. These are the three first Godward approaches. We will pursue this theme next Thursday. So any questions? When you are with a person who is suffering, for you also to suffer, may be and share the suffering, may be ethically good, but that by itself is not the solution. You have to receive that impact with a certain equality, not going under, but go to a station of peace, a level where you have a peace, and try to impose that peace upon the subject of suffering. The more spiritual one is, the more of calm and peace that person can impose or reach to the suffering person. When we feel a kind of sharing the suffering, it is only on a certain emotional level. It does not go to the soul level. The moment that suffering reaches the soul level, its value is translated differently. It goes simple, reaching out its strength to the person. And that strength is peace. For the ultimate solution for all illness, for all suffering, is peace. And that peace deepens into joy. So a spiritually developed person, his help will be most felt in vibrations of peace first and vibrations of joy afterwards. To share the suffering is only the first step, but it is not the solution. The solution is to go to the root of suffering. And that root can be taken off by reaching peace and the innate delight of the soul to that person. Suffering shows that one is conscious. So, it is at the ego level of awareness. Accidents are accidents. By the very definition of the word, they are not things in the normal course of life. So you can always take it. Accidents are brought about by beings or forces which are opposed to the divine reign. They take advantage of our moments of unconsciousness. When we are not aware, when we are absent-minded, as they say, most of the accidents take place in that time. They are always on the lookout, these adversaries, always on the lookout for opportunities to upset things, cause accidents. Everywhere, even in a spiritual realm. When you are off guard, that's the time. So accidents are not chosen by the soul.
So, how do I call it? More conscious person have less access?
Yes.
And are people maybe not as conscious as they are expected to access?
Many times it happens that because you are in the company of a conscious being, you are protected, whether you are aware of it or not. And accidents are averted. There have been cases when because one man has a strong destiny, developed consciousness, has been in a ship, that ship has escaped disaster, where it should normally have some. Reverse also is true. That a person with a strong negative destiny, if we happen to be with him, we will all share his destiny, negative destiny. But these are complicated subjects, There is no direct and simple solution for these things. So many factors, so many considerations are involved. The choice of the soul, the destiny of the person, the collective destiny of the people who are already there, and God's intention. All these things are there, so it is not always easy to give direct, straight answers to questions regarding destiny and these matters. Yeah? If there is a distinction between needs and desires. Very often, desires masquerade as needs. What one truly needs, not what one thinks one needs. If one has trust in the divine, that is provided by the divine. If it is not, it means it is not necessary for you. It depends on the completeness of your faith and trust. Trust is something more than faith. Trust is a loving confidence that the divine will give you what you really need. Very often, man does not know what is good for him and what is really needed. That is why Sri Aurobindo says in Savitri, in one passage, heaven's wiser love rejects man's prayer.
interfere with nature. I'm trying to reconcile the feeling that that's the diversity of beauty with the fact that you feel such a communion with the whole.
Yeah, certainly. I think here nature is more conscious. Even the hills, they have a certain vibrancy. I have had occasion to pass through many mountains in Boulder, Colorado and all that. But they don't have this personality. There's something holy about them. God always chooses certain places on the globe where He concentrates His consciousness for a purpose. All over the globe there are such places where spiritual energy is concentrated. And anybody who walks into that place gets the impact. And from another point of view, nobody will come to this place unless he is ready for it. If you don't take advantage of it, it is your loss. But you are brought by providence because you are ready